She opened the door to a storm-drenched desert, and two full-grown lions were standing there, silent, unmoving, staring straight into her soul. Inside, the orphaned cub whimpered once, and the lioness stepped forward, not to attack, but to lay down. What happened next defied every law of nature, but what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jenna's heart raced as she pressed the accelerator, her old truck skidding slightly on the slick dirt road as the storm howled louder behind them. The lion cub, Elijah, lay barely conscious on the passenger seat, his tiny ribcage rising and falling with fragile, uneven effort. Mud and blood had soaked through the coat she'd wrapped around him, and his breathing let out a faint, wheezing rattle, like air leaking from a torn balloon. The smell in the cab was metallic, wound in wet fur, but Jenna didn't flinch. Her mind was locked in the clinical resolve that had guided her through gunshot fox rescues, entangled deer, and even the time she'd stitched up a jaguar under sedation at a border sanctuary. But this was no ordinary rescue. The sheer absurdity of it gnawed at the back of her thoughts. A lion cub, out here, alone, in a thunderstorm? Elijah whimpered softly as the truck jolted over a pothole, the sound almost human in its pain. Jenna reached one hand off the wheel and placed it gently on his forehead, her thumb brushing across his soaked fur. His skin twitched beneath her touch, a ghost of instinctual fear, but he didn't move away. That was what broke her. Not the storm, not the injuries, but that he had already learned not to expect kindness. When they finally reached her small adobe home, a squat, sun-baked structure now hammered by rain, Jenna flung open the door and rushed him inside. She cleared her entire work table in a single sweep, knocking over vials, bandages, a chipped mug of tea. Laying Elijah down under the overhead lamp, she saw the full extent of his condition. His paw pads were torn open. One ear was split, and the gashes along his flank were lined with dirt and infection. Someone had let this happen, or caused it. With shaking hands, she prepped saline, antibiotic ointment, and sterile dressings. Rain pounded the windows like fists. Thunder rumbled like distant artillery. She whispered to him the whole time, soft nonsense words and promises she couldn't yet guarantee. "You're okay now," she murmured as she cleaned the wounds. "You're safe. I swear it." Outside, the desert swallowed the storm and darkness. Inside, a woman stitched hope into a creature the world had nearly forgotten. And for the first time in hours, Elijah slept. The dawn cast an amber haze over the desert, the kind of still, breath-held silence that made the world feel paused. Jenna stood frozen in her kitchen, a half-filled bottle of formula cooling in her hand, the hum of her old fridge now loud in her ears. Through the fogged window pane, the impossible remained motionless. Two lions, adult, regal, and eerily still, stood just beyond the stone-lined boundary of her yard. The mist curled around them like smoke, softening the edges of their muscular forms, but their presence was razor-sharp. The male, broad-shouldered with a heavy golden mane streaked with dust, stared directly into the window, eyes unwavering. The female, slightly smaller but no less majestic, held her posture low but alert, her tawny gaze flicking from Jenna to the adobe walls, then back again. Neither growled, neither snarled. They didn't pace, didn't crouch to pounce. They simply stood, like sentinels. Jenna's heart hammered beneath her ribs. Her protective instinct surged, and she shifted her body, shielding Elijah, who dozed in a lined crate just beyond the kitchen island. She had treated him at 2 a.m., and he had finally slept, his body warm and pliant under the towel. The infection was waning. The stitches were holding. But what did this mean? She set the bottle down gently on the counter and reached for the old .22 she kept in the corner. Not to use it. She wasn't even sure it would help against lions. but because it was habit. She crept to the front window for a better angle. Outside, the lions remained still, watching. It wasn't territorial. It wasn't predatory. There was something else in the way they stood, something deliberate. It was the way the female's ears perked each time Elijah stirred in the next room, the way the male's tail flicked once, precisely, when Jenna moved into view. She blinked, breath fogging the glass. Her mind fought the idea rising in her chest like a tide, that these lions knew something, that they hadn't found her by accident, that they had followed something here. But how? And why now? As the sun climbed over the ridge and burned away the mist, the two lions still had not moved. Jenna felt the pulse of something primal, ancient, vibrating in her bones. This wasn't instinct, it was intention. Jenna hadn't slept, but she couldn't bring herself to move either. Her body remained rigid in the kitchen chair, the warm wood of her shotgun resting against the edge of the table, untouched since dusk. The only sound through the long desert night was the occasional rattle of wind against the roof tiles and the steady rhythm of Elijah's breathing in the crate beside her. The lions remained outside, silent, unmoving, like statues cast by moonlight and mystery. When the sun finally crested the far ridge, the morning came not with relief, but with a stillness that felt even heavier than the night. Jenna stepped quietly to the front window again, breath catching in her throat. They were still there. And then Elijah stirred. The cub, stronger now, hauled himself clumsily across the floor, limbs still fragile but animated with purpose. He stopped at the base of the window and lifted his tiny head. What came from his throat wasn't a roar or a whimper. It was a rasping, instinctive cry, one Jenna had only ever heard in newborn calves separated from their mothers. But this wasn't desperation. It was a call. Outside, the lioness responded first. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She stepped forward without raising her head, without baring a single tooth. Then, with a grace that seemed choreographed by something far older than logic, she lay down directly in front of the door. Jenna's breath faltered. Every survival instinct screamed against what she did next. She opened the door. The lioness didn't flinch. Elijah let out a second cry, softer now. He crossed the threshold, not with fear, but with familiarity, and collapsed into the lioness's side. She licked him once across the head, then again along the spine, a low, throaty moan rumbling from her chest that was too full of ache to be anything but mourning and reunion all at once. Jenna's knees buckled. She sank to the ground in the doorway, the cool adobe pressing into her shins. That's when the male came. He approached with the gravity of a king, powerful, immense, and yet his amber eyes held no threat. Jenna remained frozen as he stepped closer. He leaned in until his breath warmed her skin and pressed his broad forehead gently against hers. He held it there. A single heartbeat. Maybe two. Then he stepped back. Without a growl, without a look over their shoulders, the lions turned. Elijah followed, dwarfed between them. And together, the trio disappeared into the sunlit mist, as if the desert had simply imagined them all. Jenna never saw them again. Not a paw print in the sand, not a snapped branch or sun-bleached tuft of fur. No nearby sightings on the ranger radios, no trail cams triggered. Nothing. The desert swallowed their presence as completely as it had revealed them, like they'd emerged from some older, deeper layer of the world and returned just as silently to it. The officials were polite but unconvinced. "No lions in Arizona," one ranger insisted with a shrug. "Not outside of captivity, and especially not like that." He spoke with confidence, but his voice had the edge of someone explaining something to a child, or perhaps to someone who'd seen too much. But Jenna didn't argue. She didn't need to. She had Elijah's blood stains still scrubbed into her porchwood. She had the memory of a lion's breath warm against her skin. She had the haunting image of a cub, not confused, not frightened, finding his way back to family like a thread pulled by something ancient and unseen. They hadn't reclaimed him. They hadn't punished her. They had thanked her, and that was enough. Even weeks later, Jenna's routines had changed. She still rose with the sun, still made her rounds at the rehab center, still restocked the wildlife cameras and repaired broken feeders. But each morning, before any of that, she stepped barefoot onto her porch with a cup of coffee warming her palms. The adobe underfoot was cool, the air still thin with the hush of pre-dawn. And she'd listen. Not with the ears of a scientist, or a skeptic, or even a vet. With something older. Some mornings she heard nothing but wind. Others, a distant bird or the patter of javelina. But now and then, rare as rainfall, she'd hear it. A low, steady rumble rolling across the desert like thunder with no storm behind it. Deep, calm, and impossibly close. No one else heard it. She never tried to prove it, because she understood something now. Some debts aren't paid in currency or favors. Some bonds stretch beyond logic or time. They don't come with explanation. They arrive like whispers in mist, like a forehead pressed to yours without a word. And the soul, if it's listening, recognizes the miracle.